Number one is curiosity, because that's where ideas come from. I mean, the ideas come because you see something or hear something and you want to know the explanation for it. And that's what starts a lot of my stories, is just, I hear something, I'm curious, I think about what happens next. I think the other skill is that you have to be a big reader, because by reading, you learn how other authors do it. You learn how story structure works. And you learn the correct balance between dialogue and what we would call narrative.
Mhm.
So I think those are important. And finally, you have to be really stubborn. you
Why?
you can't give up in the middle of a manuscript, and it's so easy to write, a couple of chapters and think, oh, this is going nowhere, I give up. And then you start another book and you give up after a couple of chapters of that. You will never finish a book unless you're stubborn enough to go all the way to the end, no matter how bad it seems to be going. Emotion, number one. People, you need to, if you don't feel tense, you don't feel frightened, you don't have some very powerful emotion, your readers will not either. And that's so important, to grab their attention through their emotions. I think the other thing is character. Really powerful characters you care about or you're curious about. I mean, you don't even have to like these people. It may be that you despise this character, but it's a character that's so fascinating, you have to keep following them. I don't know if this is the same saying in Germany, but here we have this saying, train wreck. If there's a train wreck, we all want to look. We all want to keep our eyes on it. It's a horrible thing to watch, but we can't look away. That's what you want in a thriller. It's something that evokes emotions and keeps you from looking away. Let's talk about what is tension. It is uncertainty. So I like to, every chapter, maybe every scene, I want to make the reader feel off balance, like something is not quite right. And they want to keep reading until they figure out what's not right. So that can be conflict. It can be two people disagreeing and you want to watch that disagreement end. It can be a question that needs to be answered, like a dead body. Where did that come from? And it can just be a sense that something's not right. So it doesn't have to be big conflict. It doesn't have to be a gun battle. It can just be something very simple between characters. And I think that those little bits of tension, which are introduced throughout the story, every chapter, every piece of dialogue, will keep the reader turning the pages. Two of them I think of. I call them dumps, character dumps and information dumps. And I see this a lot in beginning authors. Okay, I see their manuscripts and they will spend pages and pages talking about a character. They will give me all the information I need to know about this character before they get to the story. It's so boring. What we love is to see characters reveal themselves over the course of a story. So maybe you don't know about his dead brother. You get hints of it, but you find out later on, middle of the book, about his dead brother. So I think beginning authors have this desire to throw all this information out really early, and that's not very interesting. It's also true for information. I mean, so we'll get to a section where all of a sudden they want to tell me everything there is to know about that subject. And that's not very artful either. So information dumps, biographical dumps, that's just the author trying to explain things when I really want to see things happen on the page. That's the easy part, because if you're curious and if you're listening to people talking or you're reading a lot of newspapers, especially newspapers, you're going to get ideas everywhere. For instance, okay, this is the story I always tell about my book, Vanish. I read the newspaper every day just because sometimes there are funny tales in there that I can use. And there's a story about a woman who was found dead in her bathtub in Boston. And they zipped her into a body bag and they sent her to the morgue, and she woke up because she wasn't dead. She was drugged. She wasn't, so I thought, well, there's no story there. It's just an incident. But the incident was so fascinating that I thought, well, how do I turn this into a book? What if this is the first scene in the story? How did she get there? How did they make this mistake? And if you write horror, you would use that and say, well, she's a zombie or she's a vampire, right? And then you have your story. But since I'm a thriller writer, I turned it into a thriller. So if you just read your local newspaper, find something weird like, oh, somebody's been going around kidnapping dogs. That would be a small story, right? Just a story of dog nappers. But then if you're a good storyteller, you'll spin that into something much larger. Where are the dogs going? Why are they being stolen? Who's using them? What's the reason for this? It becomes a whole different, it becomes a whole novel. I think research is the thing that comes last almost. First is the character. Who are you writing about? For instance, the book I'm writing now, which I think the title is going to be called Spyville. It started off because, as I mentioned, we have a lot of retired spies in my little town. It's an odd little town that way. And I began to think about, well, what is it like to be a retired spy? You know, you've had this really exciting life and now you're sitting at home in this little town. Maybe you're raising chickens and you have all these memories. And what it's like to be a 60-year-old woman who was doing glamorous stuff and now she's, like I said, raising chickens. So that became the story because I was interested in this woman. She's maybe not, you know, as women get older, people start to pay less attention to us. They don't listen to us. We're not interesting, even though we may have had really interesting lives. So she became the center of the story. She has a past, and now the past is coming back to haunt her. And that became the story for Spyville. The research comes first if you need to set if you need a setting, if you need to know exactly where your story is taking place. Now, luckily, it's taking place in my hometown, so I don't need to research that much, but I did need to research, you know, how do spies train? What kind of work do they do? And that, for me, that involved a lot of reading more than anything. Just collecting as much information as I can. But even though the research becomes important for setting and for accuracy, it's not the most important part of your story. Most important part of your story is, who are you writing about? Who is this woman and what is haunting her? I never stick to the idea that I had in the beginning. It always changes. It always evolves. And I don't, you know, I start off with kind of an outline, but I don't stick to it because halfway through I think, oh no, this is a better idea. And then I'll just follow that. As an example, we'll go back to that book, Vanish, I told you about the person waking up in the body bag. So I was writing the first draft. And it started off as a man wakes up in the body bag and then he goes to the hospital to recover and he grabs the security guard's gun and he takes hostages. And so I'm halfway through the story and it's now a hostage crisis in the hospital. And Jane Rizzoli is one of the hostages. And then I thought, I'm getting kind of bored with this story. I don't know where it goes next. I have no idea why he's doing these things. And besides which, men always take hostages. This is not a new story. And then I came up with the idea, but what if it was a woman? What if it was a woman who woke up in the body bag? A woman who's taking hostages? Now it becomes really different. It becomes really puzzling. And so right there in the middle of the story, I changed it all. The man became a woman and I just kept on writing the story to the end as if it had always been a woman in the body bag. I forgot to mention, this is something your students may need to know. I think it's most important to finish the first draft rather than to make sure everything is perfect. Don't stop to edit because it'll slow you down. I never stop to edit my first drafts. I just keep on going until I write the end. And then I go back and I do the revisions. No, the structure, I don't think about it. It's probably just sort of subconscious. You know, it's like any writer, you know, there's a beginning, a middle, and end, and you just want to make it all exciting. And I don't really think too much about structure beyond wanting my characters to reach their goals by the end of the story. The names, It's really, sometimes you have to fit the name to the character, and I don't always know. And very often I change the names in the second and third draft. So they may start off John and they may end up Frank. I have no idea. It's a little bit like naming a baby. You name a baby in the hospital, you bring it home and you realize, oh no, that baby's not a Josh. That baby's really something else. So that's a little bit like, naming your characters. The characters evolve. Sometimes when I'm writing the first draft, all I know is their name and their sex. That's all I know. And as you're writing the story, you get to know them, and sometimes they change, sometimes they evolve into even a different gender. So it's all done in the process. Nothing is set in stone when I start. And I think that if you set it in stone early on, it doesn't allow for the creative process to work. You need to be able to reshape things as you need to. I think the only particular character quality I need is that they're interesting. They don't have to be nice, and they don't have to be, in fact, evil characters are just as interesting. When I wrote The Surgeon and the Apprentice, I think the most interesting character was Warren Hoyt, who was the killer. You don't have to like him, but you have to be so fascinated by the way his mind works. There has to be something really, it's like, the talented Mr. Ripley, that serial killer from classic mystery literature. That person is not a nice person, but you want to follow them. So always make sure there's something about that character that you want to dig deeper and deeper yourself as the author. If you're writing a hero, you also have to make that hero really, really interesting, and have issues that they are working through themselves. They can't just be, good guys. There has to be something else going on in their lives. Most criminals are not too bright. I think that cops will tell you that they're not too bright. What's interesting is the intelligent villain, the one who can go head to head with your hero, someone who is an adequate challenge. Unless you're writing comedy. If you're writing comedy, then it's okay to have a stupid villain. But a real thriller needs to have somebody who's worthy of our hero's attention. It depends on the story. I've done it both ways. Sometimes you hear from the villain's point of view, but you don't yet know they're a villain. You just hear that they are going through some things. And, in the book, I wrote a book called I Know a Secret, where there is a narrator, and the narrator is a young woman. And you know that she's somehow caught up in this mystery, but you don't know why, because things don't get revealed until the very end. I love those sorts of stories where you get to know a character, but you don't really know what their role is in the story until the end. And then it all comes together and all makes sense. No, I can't quantify it. I like to be surprised as a reader. So there have to be enough twists to make me follow different paths or have different theories as I'm reading the story. If I keep my head down, in about a year. The first draft takes me, I don't know, about 6 months, and all the revisions take me about another 6 months. It's such a relief. And I sometimes when I'm in the middle of writing a book, I think, why am I putting myself through this? I can't, I don't have a life. I'm so busy with these fake people. I can't live my own life. And then when you turn it in, you're so relieved. You're so relieved that it finally all came together, and you can toss that baby away and let that baby walk away and leave your life. And then, of course, unfortunately, because you're a writer, you've already got the next idea for the next book coming. So it's one of these obsessions. I think a lot of writers are obsessed. They sometimes hate the process. They sometimes the happiest day of their lives is when they get rid of the story, but they can't stop doing it.